This was my first look at some of the behind the scenes and how much staff work to support these meetings. So I want to express my appreciation and give a shout out to Dr. Felder and Ms. Stowe and Ms. Fergus and Dr. Keeling and Dr. Dawson, Gammon and Ms. Cobb and everyone who put some of this, all these efforts into play. There's a lot of work going behind the scenes with the asset map that's going to be presented in a little while. And thank you also Chair McKenzie for your help getting me prepared for this, and for Ms. Smiley, who I believe first put forward an idea of having a community engagement committee before us three new members. So let's go ahead and get started, and I want to share my screen for this first part in a minute, where we are going to share board member ideas about community engagement. I know we all have a lot of passion and enthusiasm to be engaged in the community. Something I love about our board and our district. And so we have ideas in our mind of what this would look like in this new committee. And so what we're going to do is first just sort of brainstorm, share those ideas. And it doesn't mean we're going to do all of them necessarily, but it'll help point out where we see need, where we see opportunity. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the purpose of the committee, which we need to keep focused on our district's 4 priorities of equity, overarching equity. I'm going to read these statements because I think they're so good that Ms. Stowe provided me. Equity goes beyond formal equality to fostering an inclusive and emotionally supportive environment where all students, regardless of their race, class, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, religious and faith tradition, family structure, geographic origin, and ability, disability, have the opportunity to benefit equally and thrive. And that is overarching our pillars of literacy, which is a gateway to opportunity, but unfortunately can be a gatekeeper as well. We firmly believe it is a civil right. Enhanced culture and climate, every student deserves to learn in a safe, supported environment. And finally, community engagement, the importance of stakeholder engagement, including our parents and community members, cannot be overstated. One expert shares that parent engagement can add an extra 2 or even 3 years to a student's education. And so that speaks right to the purpose of our committee. So I'm going to share my content here. And just keeping in mind that we're wanting to have equity, literacy, culture and climate, obviously community engagement, speak to these ideas. And first I want to share 5 that Jennifer Moore shared with me. Partner with PTA and host a coffee and pastry or virtual PTA activity where we could help them welcome families and sign them up for PTA. So that would be an early school year sort of event. But as we know, PTAs are still, that's not something we've missed. Celebrate reading with a literacy night. Maybe partner with Orange County Public Library to have someone come in and tell what they have to offer to support the students. Family fitness night, virtual or gym, safe to return. Possibly one of Orange County Schools PE teachers could help lead the event. She gives a shout out to Coach C. Partner with admin teams, bring your own lunch with parents. This could be a virtual event as well. Administrators could inform parents of things happening at the school and student learning. Maybe we could provide general info such as board meeting times and encourage parents to attend and contact info. Mental health night. That really speaks to our culture and climate. It's really relevant here. Maybe we could partner with Orange County Health Department for a virtual or in-person event when it's safe to do so. They had a session in July. Maintaining mental wellness. I'll save mine for the end, and I'm want to pass to see who wants to go next. Mr. Atherton, do you want to share what you brought today?
Yeah, sure. So I had the first one I had was similar to Miss Moore's about the PTA engagement. And I know about 10 years ago, dating my older kids, that board members, there was a board member assigned to each school that they would go to the PTA meetings. And it was mostly for them to just listen and bring back to the rest of the board some of the activities going on, some of the challenges they were facing. And if there were updates that the board wanted to give, they would give to that, individual board member to update the PTAs. But it was a good way for the school and the PTA to have a board member at least in there listening and giving feedback to the board member. The second one I had was maybe us having a more formal board office hours where we rotate members out. So the community, two at a time, or some number where we just say, hey, this month we're going to have these two board members at this time, and community can roll in. Not to say that others couldn't join, but just a more formal way, especially since the access to us, yes, people can call us and things like that, but a lot of people don't feel comfortable. And my experience with the office hours is some people don't turn on their camera and they will only type in the chat. My question is this, we read it and say it. So, just giving people another way to communicate with the board on topics and concerns. The third one is more focusing in and saying, review the comments and results from the staff teacher surveys and ensure we're doing it in off years versus the state, and us making sure how we're engaging with the students or the staff and teachers and understanding their concerns, because I know that a lot of information is in the comments of the surveys versus just the individual results. The fourth one I had was a monthly reading club through the county and partnering. It's similar to the library or other organizations where, at the elementary level, we could say, here's a book of the month, and we're going to publish some questions, and have elementary kids or others or families post pictures about what they enjoyed about the book, and of course making sure the books are culturally relevant throughout the year, so that way we're making sure that we're just not posting a book. And then the last one is outreach to the many community clubs we have on updates or challenges they're having in the community, or making it a two-way conversation on updates just from the school. I find that a lot of the organizations don't understand the depth of like our CTE programs and opportunities we have at the older grades, especially because a lot of these groups provide things as scholarships and support to the teachers or student organizations. So those were the ones I had.
Great, thank you. Ms. Hauser, want to go next?
Sure. Let's see, yeah, sure. So I had a slightly different kind of view on some of this. One of the things that I thought would be helpful to the board is to talk about the board meetings themselves. One thing is in the hopes that someday we go back to meeting in person, that we move those meetings out of that little room. Because if you want people to disengage, tell them to wait outside or go in that crowded room and wait for a meeting. So I would love to see a meeting possibly to the Whitted Building, which I just read is about to be renamed to the Donna Baker Boardroom, which is really exciting to me. But the commissioners will give that to us if we want their Granicus recording. That will cost us some money, but that's one thing I hope you'll consider. If our meeting involves a school, then I'd love us to be meeting at schools so that parents and teachers who are affected can engage. Also, on our agendas, if the meeting involves teachers or families, I would like them to always be allowed to speak first, or those agenda items to always be first, because they have an early morning. So I'd like them to be able to get in and out. And then the meeting structure itself is a little complicated, and I wondered if there's a way we could simplify it. I like the way the county does it. They either have business meetings or work sessions. One allows public comment, the other doesn't, but that's something that you all can look at. I'd love to see our online, all the letters that come to the board go online in the archive. I realize there are privacy issues, but in the interest of transparency, I think parents would be very interested to see what we're getting from the community. The other thing I'm interested in is the district surveys in the spirit of engagement.
Wait, Bonnie, I'm sorry. Bonnie, I'm interrupting you for just a minute. I lost the last one. After you talked about the 2 types of sessions with public comment, what was the last item?
The structure of the online letter archive. So, and you could see, I don't know what the other school board's doing, but I know the county, the towns all have all their public letters online. And I realize there's a privacy consideration, but I think there's some easy ways around that. But I think they're very helpful from all in the pulse of what's happening in the community. And I think if we can offer more transparency around that, that would be great. And then I would be interested in a profile of the district uses a lot of surveys, and I'm kind of interested in a profile of who's responding to them. Because in my community work, I have always found a education and race bias in surveys. And I just don't know if the surveys are getting us to the people, to all of our people. So I wonder if we're creating an inequity problem with them. I could probably get into more, but that's probably a great start.
Okay, great. Ms. Smiley and then Ms. McKenzie.
I like many of these ideas that have been shared so far. First, the idea of teachers speaking first, I'd add students to that. And there are a couple of other districts I know that do this, where they purposely in public comment, they say, okay, first students can speak, and then, if you're a teacher, and then if you're a parent, and then community members at the end. And I think that is something we could consider. I guess my angle on this is slightly different, which is I'm interested in many of these ideas, but I think that talking about what is the purpose first is where I would start. So to me, this committee is about both how do we engage as a board with the community and thinking about the district's engagement with stakeholders. Because I think as board members, we're sort of out there more and we have some additional perspective to add to that second piece as well. And so to me, the focus would be both on how we engage as a body and the district. So others may or may not agree with that. And then sort of why do we engage? Like what's sort of the purpose of our engagement? And some of it is, hearing feedback from people, and some of it is to engage people in decision making. And there's different reasons we might engage. And so understanding, like, getting clearer about like what are the most important things we want to accomplish by engaging with people, rather than just sort of engagement for engagement's sake, and then those things leading to then how should we engage, and what are some of the best sort of common ways as board members or a district we might want to engage. I think could help it give a little bit of focus to that. And then what else did I have thoughts on here? I also think this committee space could be a place to share trends in what we're hearing. Some of those may not be able to wait a whole month or something, but around particular topics, sort of discussing what we're hearing, and then also potentially a space to talk about other best practice we're seeing in terms of community engagement around some particular kind or another. So Ms. Hauser's point about surveys, I think that is absolutely true in the surveys where we have asked for race, for example. We've definitely seen lower response rates among Black and Latinx families. And so that's one example of sort of a like, what are some of the best practices then for reaching those families? And what are we seeing in other districts? And a couple of the specific ideas that people suggested that I'll just say like a +1, I think that's a great idea. Will's idea about sort of rotating formal board office hours, I think would be great. And the idea of moving to the Whitted building as well, particularly if it's free, I'm really interested in that as well.
Is it me now, Carrie? Okay, great. I really appreciate what everyone has said, and I will streamline my suggestions because some of them sort of overlap what has already been said. I had some kind of out of the box ideas, which I know will be shocking to people. One of the things I was thinking, and we have a parent academy, but this idea is a little bit different than that. I don't know what we would call it, and I don't even know if we would want to do it, but I did a citizens academy with the town of Hillsborough several years ago where I just learned about the different functions in the town and the way that they work together to run the town, and I found it incredibly informative. And I thought maybe at some point, probably not in the time of COVID, but maybe there is space for us to run some sort of similar set of classes for the community so they do understand how our district operates and how decisions are made, because what seems obvious to all of us who are a part of the system, I don't think is always so clear to other people. So that was one idea. Another idea I had was something that I just wrote down was school board on a bus. And the idea would be small groups of board members, or maybe the whole board with public notice, travel to a location in the community and just kind of talk schools. So have casual conversations with folks who want to engage with us. I mean, it's kind of limitless where we could go. I'm thinking the Walmart parking lot, the soccer fields on fall nights. I don't know, just something maybe we would think about. One of the things that I had also had, which is very timely, was affinity groups of teachers who support one another and make recommendations to the board. So it's quite timely, and I appreciate Dr. Keeling already moving on that. And then the last thing was just sort of improving systemic ways of reaching underrepresented communities. And I think that we're going to discuss that later in the meeting, so I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, these are awesome ideas. Thanks, everybody. Let's see. I don't even know what sequence mine are below as I go through this screen. And I want to mention some of this we'll find is happening in our district. And so part of this meeting is learning what the district staff already has underway. And so I want to mention that as I suggest like an advisory group type thing, it may not be necessary as we learn what's already happening. But so that first one, that's all off to the side now, that's okay. Outreach to the Latinx community. This has been something that's really been on my mind just because of friendships I have and people I talk to that, particularly because of language barriers, and it's sometimes because people are coming from other countries, that sometimes there's a better understanding and trust in the American educational system, how things work here versus where they work in other places. And this kind of speaks to Ms. McKenzie's point of like providing information of how we do things as a district. But similarly, as an outreach, wanting to get out in the community, as some of these other suggestions are, making ourselves available as board members in an organized way, whether a monthly gathering, maybe some of these could be virtual. I'd love for some to be in person. Could be seasonal, at a location selected by member community or with their consultation, and then reverse translation services for English speakers such as board members who choose to attend. So again, just trying to increase that two-way conversation for board members and for us to do that in sort of a corporate way and a regular way. Similarly, this is something Ms. McKenzie and I have started to do. We're kind of doing some outreach a little bit to local indigenous community, particularly the Occaneechi band of the Sapani Nation. And I have to say, I have boys who have been in the Boy Scouts Occaneechi tribe, and it's not Occaneechi Council, excuse me, and it's not spelled the same way, and that kind of bothers me. Are we not even spelling it correctly? And so that tribal nation is centered in Burlington, but includes, historically land and still people here in our district. So how can we better collaborate with these community partners? What is our district's history with these peoples? How can we acknowledge history in ways that inform curriculum and foster respect and trust? I'm not particularly knowledgeable on students and families' needs at all, but it is, I've had a lot of conversations with one-on-one people. And so I know there's a desire for, the board to understand the situation that EC families have and what those needs are like. And I think they're broad. But if we could have some sort of regular board participation at events that maybe are already ongoing. I know one parent I met who I didn't know previously mentioned that there had been like a special needs parent, like PTA. If anyone knows something about this, please jump in. But I feel like there are networks, there's conversation that happens. It would be nice, again, if we could be present in an organized way so that we're all kind of learning what those needs are and what those conversations are.
Carrie, if I could jump in, Chapel Hill Schools has a special needs advisory council that's been in effect for years. And it's powerful. Actually, it is that and their PTA council is a source for future board members. It's a way for people to get involved. But of course, Chapel Hill has a large EC population, but it ends up being, and it's a combination of community members, teachers, and administrators, and board members, administrators. So it's kind of really a combined working group. And they bring in outside experts that speak on critical issues affecting the community. So it's a learning place, but it's also a support space. And this is something I've noticed with our special needs parents, is it is really challenging for them. And this is a way for them to be with others. It's a affinity group, if you will.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Ms. Hauser. I have 2 boys on the robotics team. So for that reason, I'm aware of some of the wonderful community we have that are community partners for our team, and networking points for students to have opportunities as they go on for robotics. And I hear about ag community partners and Habitat for Humanity opportunities. What are some areas where we have community partners that support our students, and where is there more opportunity for that? And another community partners aspect that I know Durham Public Schools, they have a whole network that involves volunteers and local farms. It used to be called Feast, and now it's called Eat North Carolina. And so a lot of the food that they're providing during the time is with this partnership. I guess it's kind of a nonprofit partnership, and then the schools as well. And my faith community, which is in Durham, gets notices about seeking volunteers. And so I feel like we have a volunteer base. I know this would probably be a big undertaking, but depending on how long we are in, the remote state that we're in and providing food in different ways, this might be something just thinking about. So, okay, so we've gotten to share some
Can I
ideas.
just add one thought to that last one, which is Feast. I did connect Dr. Felder to that organization. I know they had some conversations with our child nutrition department. I think that, if I'm remembering correctly, the last thing was that they sort of put it on hold, any further decision making, because we were preparing for the start of school and things were, I'm not exactly sure all of the reasons, but that seemed promising to me in terms of local restaurants, local farms, and volunteers, those things potentially expanding the reach of our ability to get food to families. So I'm not sure where that piece is, but just wanted to add that piece that I know that child nutrition has at least had some level of conversation with that group. Also, the woman who runs Eat North Carolina, I believe her husband is a teacher in our district. So that is cool.
Right, thank you. Okay, so we're going to come back to some of this sense of purpose, because we do a little bit of an agenda, but back to the point of what is the purpose of this committee? How do we engage as a board with the community? And lots of us have relationships in a sort of corporate way, or have those access points for the board as a whole, or so that we're all hearing that input and feedback. And so we had a lot of ideas to that point, how we engage as a body and how the district engages. So now we're going to hear some information from the Listen and Learns about desires the community has, as well as we're going to hear from staff about ways Orange County Schools already engaged in the community. And so that can help us think about ways that we can participate in what's already going on by either being present and listening, or by soliciting summaries or feedback in regular ways from these staff events. So I think we're going to keep going with the agenda and come back to this conversation at the end, which we might not even fully nail down in this first mini meeting. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Dr. Felder, I'm going to figure out if I can figure out how to stop sharing. Stop sharing, there we go. And then Dr. Felder, I'll pass to you.
Thank you. All right, thank you so much, Mrs. Doyle. So I have not figured out how to start or stop sharing, so I'm punting to Melanie. She has my slides. She's going to share her screen. So Ms. Doe, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
All right. Beautiful. Thank you so much. All right. So this is truly a team effort. So prior to the onset of COVID-19 in March, when schools were closed for learning, the district facilitated 8 out of the 12 scheduled Listen and Learns for family and community. We facilitated 3 out of 3 of the staff Listen and Learns, and 1 of 3 student Listen and Learns. So the goal of the Listen and Learns was to hear from our families, our staff, our students, and to understand, in an effort to understand what is working in the district, as well as what's not working in the district. And so the district is focused on building, as you know, equity, access, and excellence into all that it does. And the feedback is an integral piece in doing this successfully. Next slide, please. So the 5 key topics outlined on this slide were the areas where feedback was solicited in the meetings using the 3 key questions also outlined on this slide. Feedback was solicited not only in the in-person meetings, but also via comment cards and an online tool. Fourth, advising is analyzing all of the listen and learn data. That data, where they are to date anyway, with it was shared with the board. But for the purpose of this meeting, they conducted a keyword analysis of topic number 2, family and community engagement. And so as we specifically solicited engagement feedback regarding what is and isn't working within the district as it relates to families in the community feeling informed, valued, and welcome as partners in Orange County schools. So while stakeholders noted the improvements that have already been made in how the district is communicating and engaging with them, a number of areas for improvement were also duly noted. And so in the next 3 slides outline the key themes identified from the feedback related to topic 2, family and community engagement, as well as recommendations from forthright advising based on the findings. Next slide, please. All right, so with regards to, any questions thus far? All right, so with regards to feedback from families related to family and community engagement, it's important to note that more than 1/4 of the comments under what needs to be improved and what recommendations do you have regarding family and community engagement, the question focused on communication. So we got a lot of feedback around communication. And so here are those key themes that bubbled up in the feedback. So needing better and more timely communication about Orange County Schools programs, events, and activities, including those athletic options and school offerings. Just wanting communication in clearer language. So we know we use a lot of acronyms and educationese. And so the feedback was less of that, please. We received feedback around ensuring that the communication is consistent and that in how messages or programs are delivered across schools and in the district. So wanting consistency in communications and how we engage. Seems to be some variance there, with some feeling more engaged than others. There was also feedback around the need to emphasize the importance of feeling welcomed and valued by schools and the district, and that not everyone can participate in some of the engagement, the ways that we engage, that we're leaving some families out of feedback and engagement opportunities. For example, the timing of board meetings. And I think some board members may have been present when that was shared in the in-person listen and learns, but it was also captured on some of the other ways that we gathered feedback through the comment cards and the online tool, that just the timing of the board meetings, just as an example, might we consider making some revisions there. And another point was a few respondents also mentioned that they have felt racism within the district in the way that we engage and communicate with them. So with regards to staff feedback, so here are the key themes from staff with regards to family and community engagement. The first bullet there, all staff noted that all school and district communications must be translated. That's certainly one of the things that I've heard since starting in the district, has been hit or miss in schools, and that there needs to be consistency and a need for interpreters for each school and every event. Staff also mentioned related to that particular theme that they asked that language teachers in particular, or staff who are bilingual or multilingual, not be pulled from their work and translate for families needing that service. Feedback also includes that staff noted that they are an integral part in building healthy communication and family engagement, and that we shouldn't lose sight of that. And that they also noted that family and community engagement is a good tactic to make the families and the community feel heard and valued. So that was feedback from staff with regards to family and community engagement. And from our students, well, not so much. So there wasn't much student feedback with regards to engagement. They focused really heavily on their actual school day experiences, those things that are very important to them, their teachers, food. They actually had a lot to say about food, but we'll save that for another meeting. So what I've did share here is that students noted that the older they get, the less cared for they feel from adults at school, and that they are requesting more support from their counselors and their teachers. I do want to note that in the SEL survey that will be administered next week to students, there are specific questions that get at engagement more from their perspective. And so know that we will have data to share soon with regards to students and how they feel about engagement as it relates to them. So, so that's the feedback, that the high level feedback with regards to the themes that emerge from the Listen and Learns held to date. And so as previously stated, next slide, please. So as previously stated, Forthright also made recommendations based on the themes and findings identified, which are noted on this slide. So it's important to note as we look at their recommendations that their recommendations don't capture every praise, there were some, every suggestion, there was some, or complaint, there were some of those too, shared through the Listen and Learn feedback sessions, comment cards, and the online tool. And so with regards to recommendations, there are 3 buckets of recommendations from Forthright. One is regarding equity, that we need to ensure as a district that equity is a key focus area in all of our schools. In addition to district-wide, that all families should feel welcomed and valued and served by the district. They are also recommending, based on their analysis of the data, continued focus on engagement, that we should continue building engagement between the community and our schools. The 3rd bucket of recommendations is regarding communication, just in general. Again, 1/4 of the feedback was around communication. So continue to focus on regular communication with families, ensuring that all messages are clear and timely. A sub-bullet there would be around language, focus on language as family engagement priority within OCS. To do so, we should ensure that all communications are translated consistently, that we should continue sharing updates with families, include emails and phone messages for these efforts, and explore alternatives like text updates as well. Next bullet, keep school leaders updated on key district decisions so they can share with their own staff, ensuring every district team member can share the same unified message with families. So that's that consistency piece. keep messaging as simple as possible to ensure equitable understanding of messages, and continue offering feedback opportunities. Many people praise the district's feedback gathering efforts. So when we think about, so those were their recommendations. And so as we think about how we are defining, we have a working definition of, it's in draft form, of community engagement. And I know Ms. Stowe is going to get that at this later on, but that draft is that community engagement is the process of working collaboratively with and through various groups of stakeholders to ensure improved outcomes for students in Orange County schools. And these recommendations certainly align with this definition. So I'll open it up for any comments or questions.
Carrie, should we just jump in, or are you gonna call on people?
Please just jump in.
Okay, so one thing I just wanted to call out, I feel like we've made a lot of progress and lots still to be made, but even from these listen and learns in terms of translations, making that available at board meetings and the materials being more consistently translated, and then the hiring of the bilingual family liaisons, which I know is still underway, but both of those things, I'm happy to see that there's an area that was really elevated that we've taken some tangible steps in the meantime on. A couple of other thoughts that don't need to be answered right now. One is, as we saw this idea, all families should feel welcome, valued, and well served, I thought, oh, I wonder how we would measure that. So back before I was on the board and was on the school improvement team at one of our elementary schools, we did a family survey, right? And so how are we sort of getting a consistent sort of touch point on that concept of who feels welcome and how many people feel welcome, and just a thought that there might be a way to tie that into, as we're developing the new strategic plan, I imagine community engagement will be part of that. So, and then just wanted to underscore this idea of simple messaging, and I would say also like brief and simple, I think is really important. And it's hard when we have, especially in COVID, so many things to communicate constantly. But that I think as a parent, it can be overwhelming to get, so much communication about so many things. And so the more, and I know Ms. Stowe, you have an eye on this too, but like just the more we can keep it real simple, I think would be helpful. So just a couple of thoughts from what you shared.
Can I just ask a quick question real quick? Dr. Felder, I'm just wondering, with the new bilingual family liaisons that we just hired, is part of their job description interpretation or translation? Because I know we talk a lot about not wanting to pull people from their positions to interpret things. So I'm just wondering where they fall in that. Is it appropriate that they would be going to the office to translate something?
So I'm going to let Ms. Stowe speak to that, but what I can tell you is that they will certainly play a role in supporting that, but that too is not going to be like their primary job. And what I can also tell you, and I know Mrs. Stowe can speak to this as well, honestly, we will likely need at some point to hire more staff to focus on translating and interpreting. It's a huge undertaking, and we certainly agree that needs to be done, and we're doing a much better job at it. But even as noted by staff, the way that some of the ways that we're getting at it is just not efficient or effective, especially when we're pulling staff from their classroom, teaching work to service interpreters, etc. So at any rate, Ms. Stowe, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Good morning. So our family outreach liaisons, they actually, they are on board, and this is their third week. Their original title included bilingual, and we actually pulled that from their day-to-day title because it gives the premise that if you need translation or interpretation services, that's your go-to. If you're Hispanic or a Korean, then that's who you go to, and that if your native language is English, that's not who you go to. So while they are bilingual, we did pull that from their day-to-day title, because we don't want to exclude our other underserved populations and other families from using them. We have implemented a translation and an interpretation form that is the one-stop shop for principals and the district. And we are tracking the data and the number of hours that they're involved in translation and interpretation services, so that we can get a better handle on exactly how much time is being devoted to that. With regards to the liaisons, they're doing very minimal part of that. We're handling that at the district level because their focus really is on the family outreach, and they actually right now they're assigned to schools, and they are reviewing and participating, reviewing the data from any school level info session, any school connected message, and looking at who's responding, but more importantly, who isn't. And that's who they are tapping into. So some families, everything's working, the system's great, and that's great. But for some families, they're silent. They're not coming. They're not responding. And that's who the family outreach liaisons are attaching themselves to, knowing them by name, knowing the children, and figuring out how to get them engaged in school in the day-to-day. And so it is an advantage that they're bilingual, but that is not their sole purpose, is just to translate. We want to engage families, whether they speak English or their native language is Spanish.
So that is helpful. I appreciate that information, and it helps me understand the role more. I certainly didn't think it was their main function to translate, but I guess what I'm really asking is, I'm a parent at New Hope, and so I go to PTA meetings as a parent, and what I notice is their full-time family outreach liaison translates for PTA meetings. And I'm not saying anybody has a problem with that. I'm just saying, do we need to in schools where everything has to be interpreted every single time, do they need an interpreter on staff? Or is it illegal that these people who it's not their title are doing all of this interpretation? So it's not really about the liaisons themselves. I'm just trying to understand where interpretation comes in the district. I don't feel like we have nearly enough, and it's a real point of concern. And also, whether we say that it's their job or not, if ultimately that's actually what they are going to be. I just want to be speaking in reality about what these folks are doing. And I don't know, I just have some concerns around the amount of interpretation we have in the district. So just wanted to put that out there.
And if I could, thank you, Mrs. McKenzie. Your points are well taken. So with regards to translations, so while one may be bilingual and, or let's just say able to speak Spanish, doesn't necessarily mean that they can also be effective at translating. I understand that's an area of certification, and so. Yeah, so we want to keep that in mind as well. I also know that we have contracts with services that also are supporting us with translations, and there are other tools and things that we make available to schools to help with that as well. But as Ms. Stowe was getting at with regards to the process, we put in a process that hopefully will make translation at the district level more efficient and more effective. For example, request to schools is that you give, I don't know what the number of days are, but maybe it's 10 days notice. If you send us something asking that it be translated the night before, that makes it difficult, because what you don't know, there are 13 schools and we may have 50 requests for the night before. So just putting in some guidelines and protocols to support us with ensuring that the things that they need translated, and if they are in need of interpreter, that we're able to support them with.
I appreciate that. I guess I just feel like in a school, and this isn't about New Hope specifically, just because I'm there and I see how much has to be communicated. Every, terrific kid assembly is bilingual, et cetera, et cetera. I just wonder how in schools where we have a really high Spanish speaking population, a 10-day notice. This is a conversation for another time. I don't want to hijack this meeting about this, but I think some more clarity from me around what is actually these people's job descriptions and what is appropriate for them to be translating would help me understand whether we need more positions in certain schools and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
and if I could clarify, again, we understand that there are going to be last minute requests, but sometimes, well in advance, you just wait till the last minute to let us know. So we're trying to avoid those instances.
And I know that you all are very thoughtful and always help in any way you can, even if it's last minute. I just, understanding the process of it is helpful for me as a board member when I'm thinking about, resource allocation and things like that. So thank you.
So just a few comments. I had looked through my notes from the lessons and learns, and I know these weren't the common themes, but I thought they were interesting and, showing how excited a lot of the community was to try to engage differently. One of the items that, I remember was one of the parents was very enthusiastic about, homecoming and having a parade and engaging the students and, just allowing students to express themselves and making it a little more formal. And that way the community is more engaged in, an event. There was several comments about that was listed here about the communication. And one of the things I had written down was, information placed where people can check versus if they're not there, they miss the call, their mailbox is full, they don't get it. They may not have, they may have limited access because of internet services, but making sure we were posting our weekly messages on the websites. And I had put, maybe we set up a mailbox at each of the schools. So a parent that doesn't have regular internet access can call the mailbox, and if they want to hear the weekly message, they select mailbox 1 and it brings them to that. And if they want it in Spanish, they go to 2. And that way they have access to hear that message that they may have missed for any number of reasons. And text updates was, as mentioned, was one of the other themes that I saw mentioned many times. The other one was transition help. And the context of that was a parent talking about, as they're going from elementary to middle school, there's a lot of anxiety and not understanding, what the student should expect, and going from middle school to even high school and not knowing what to expect. And one of the things that was mentioned was, in one case, they said that there was a video created and just went through the schools and, showed, hey, this is building, 1, and in this building, these are the things that are there, and building 2. And I think, some of these to help the anxiety of the students and the parents would be very helpful, whether it's video or text, or, text meaning just wording of that, especially in the transitions would help. And of course, making these available in English and Spanish. The last one that I'll mention that was very interesting, that caught my eye from all of them, was the greetings in the morning and afternoon from staff, and it not being as consistent. And that the context of it wasn't the greeting part, was that several parents were like, yeah, they're, when we're greeted in the morning, the principal that's standing out there might say, hey, don't forget, we have a book club coming up, or we have, a PTA meeting, or just that personal reminder where they may not have heard the messages, or just feeling like, they're reaching out to them. But that was one of the last ones I'll mention, that the greetings and reminder in person was very effective, especially as elementary, you have a lot of car riders and things like that. Anyway, I just wanted to mention those items from my notes.
I'd like to jump on something that Sarah talked about at the beginning, which is the split between board communications and school level communications, because they're really different. And I think we're talking about, we're kind of mixing them all. Like all this is really important about school communication. I love that the district is looking at these issues, and I've never seen anything more powerful or more potentially powerful than our school's ability to communicate with our families. And everything that we could do to put more behind that, I'd be really interested in. I get really worried about the board. And as a new board member, I can tell you it has been shocking to me about the access I have and the power that I have that I didn't have 3 months ago. People listen to me differently, they react to me differently. And so when a board member shows up, all of a sudden everything changes. And I say that in the context of us showing up in community, saying, oh, we'd like to meet with you. And when we do that, we've just disrupted everything they are about. And I wonder if we could first go into a listening process. It's more interesting, I think, if you show up in community, go in the back of the room and listen and see what's happening. For example, the Kiwanis Terrific Kids, or actually Mount Zion Church has a very similar thing to that. We don't need to ask them to engage, but if we show up for that and we're just in the room, people are honored as opposed to us asking for a meeting with them. I do think a place where we might want to consider a more active role, and I don't really know, I haven't asked them, is the Mlk Collaborative. You know, because as you know, it's in a organization, it's a combination of the NAACP with a couple of dozen churches that have been doing this together for years. They have the oratorical contest. I know Dr. Felder spoke last year at it, but I wonder if the school district should have a role in that operation. So just a thought. But again, school board and how we engage, or if we begin to engage more in community, can we do it from a spirit of service? Because the world's going to see us from a perspective of power. So.
Okay, any other comments before we move on to talking about the asset map? And thank you, Dr. Felder, for presenting the listen and learn data. It's really helpful.
I do have one broader, and this may have been in the summary that was sent in the weekly update, but I remember going to some of the listen and learns and wishing there were more people there. And I know we gathered information through surveys and the comment cards themselves, you know, some other ways. But I'm wondering if we have any way to know who came, sort of who we heard from, and sort of a more meta way, this conversation about whose input we've received. Do we have any way to know that?
So we do have sign-in sheets. So we have that information. With regards to the comment cards, it was optional whether one wanted to put their information. Most chose not to. Typically, a name was included if they wanted us to get in touch with them about whatever they put on their card, and we did. With regards to the online, that was optional as well. And the majority of folks did not identify themselves.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think we got really good information from these listen and learns, and from reading the review, and there were some common themes that kept coming up. So it's not to say that wasn't useful. I think it was very useful, but you know, as we think about these sorts of things in the future, it seemed like we were offering sort of everything you could. It was in the evening, there was pizza. I feel like it was pretty well advertised, and yet, you know, and there was childcare. I think, yeah. And yet, you know, the engagement was still, in terms of the in-person, was still quite low in several of them.
Yeah, I think, Mrs. Smiley, you bring up such a good point, and I won't go on in great length here, but I think there's some historical, I'm still new, right, and trying to get a handle on the community. But from what I pick up from the conversations I have, there's some historical issues here, and I'll just leave it at that, that we need to explore. And I think to Mrs. Hauser's point, there's some historical issues, and we I think are going to really need to think a little differently with regard to how we engage, and maybe broaden broaden our horizons in terms of how we do that, because some of the traditional models are not working for people for a lot of reasons. A, because of historical reasons, also because of just their lifestyle and their needs. They're just not able to participate. But what I will tell you, I did get a lot of one-off feedback around just thank you for providing the opportunity, whether they were able to make it or not, just knowing that it was there and they could participate in a number of ways, from the cards to the online to the in-person. But I think we have a lot of work to do to repair or to bridge gaps that have existed for a very long time.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Can I just say one thing here, Bonnie, which is that really resonates with me too, and some of the things that I've seen and heard. And I'm really, that seems like it could be a fruitful topic even for one of these future committee meetings, right? It's like, how do we crack out of how do we sort of break that mold of traditional engagement in ways that are actually gonna communicate to our community something different, and sort of create that space where where that dialogue can happen. So.
Yeah, and I was just going to add that in the old days, and the district used to host what they called minority summits. So in that, Black parents would meet with Black teachers and administrators. White folks weren't welcome. To me, it's like having a bunch of Jews sitting around together. They talk differently. We talk differently than if other people are in the room. So when you're and the context, actually, I'll tell you, the meeting that I had was with Jake Henry, Reverend Ascot was there, Elvira Mebane was there, and they said, what happened to those? Those were great. And so it might be worth, Dr. Felder, for you to reach out to Reverend Ascot and ask, and see if there might be an interest in starting something like that, and maybe creating a similar opportunity for other groups, that like-minded, culturally aligned groups. So they were very effective, and it was a way to really talk about the real issues that their kids were having in their ways.
Sounds like an affinity group of some.
Yeah, an affinity. I didn't want to use, I'm afraid I was.
Yeah, we've been using that word a lot.
It wasn't, but it was 10 years ago, I mean, it was before.
Okay, so I think we should keep going. I know that Ms. Stowe has organized presentation. I know it's going to be more that we're reading and asking questions, but she's facilitated an asset map review for us, and we're going to hear from several speakers about different aspects of those groups. So do you want to start us off, Ms. Stowe?
Sure. And I will share my screen, but I also just emailed the board members a copy of this. Well, not a copy, a link to it. So you're able to scroll through because it's about 13 pages. You may want to look at page 12 when I'm on page 10. But I will share this as well. 1 second. Okay, I want to just confirm you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, I can't tell. Thanks. So first, in terms of any, well, specifically community engagement, we do a lot, and we can put the outputs out and be busy 24/7. But at the end of the month, the day, the year, in order to determine if we've been successful, we have to know where we're starting. And so I appreciate Ms. Doyle had, well, first this committee, but then Ms. Doyle had asked some questions about what are we doing. And so this is a draft. I want to be very clear. It's a draft and it's a work in progress. So there are some blanks and we will take care of filling those out. And I'm sure we've missed some things, but we'll continue to add to this. And so first, it's just where are we right now? And on the asset map, there are two things I want to draw your attention to. First is the asset type. If it's primary, then Orange County Schools controls it. We facilitate the group, the meeting. We, in essence, control that. If it's secondary, it's a group that's external that includes us in their process. And then potential is, a group that we do engage with, but it's not every week or every month or the third Thursday. One example is our faith-based community. We have a listserv and we communicate with them, but it's not at a specific time. It's when we need to better engage our families and need help, particularly during COVID and closures and remote learning. And so potential is just that there's potential there. We just haven't necessarily defined it. And these are not our business partners. If a business is listed, it's because there's an ongoing relationship and communication that's important to our work and family engagement and certainly student success. The other piece would be the 4 district priorities. And while equity is a part of everything, I have pulled that as one of the 4. So we have equity, literacy, culture and climate, and community engagement. And in the role of communications and community engagement, there are 3 levels of communication. One is transactional. Who, what, when, where, why. It's what we do every day. It's a social media post. It's a phone call. It's just transactional. We need you to know this. Mr. Atherton, you mentioned, principals saying there's a book club coming up. Very transactional. We do a lot of that.
Yep.
We want to focus, and those are important because people need to know, but we want to push the focus to outcomes. That because of our communication, because of our efforts, because of these assets, there are outcomes that we can point to that are tangible in our 4 priority areas. So when you think of transactional, who, what, when, where, why, it's hard to judge that provided equity or it increased literacy. It's just, again, transactional. So these assets are groups that we believe, because we're spending time with them, and have an ongoing relationship that we're developing outcomes because of this. And part of this process is, are there groups and are there times of which we're spending that's not providing the outcome we need? Because there are only 24 hours in a day and there are only 7 days in a week. And so at some point we can do anything, but we cannot do everything. And so these 4 priorities really keep us focused on the work and the outcomes we expect. And as mentioned previously by several of you, there are also 3 levels of communication that go towards families. And the most important comes from teachers. Teachers, I've done a lot of different data review, more qualitative. A teacher that knows how to communicate, that saves the day all the time. If a parent needs something, a teacher can save the day, can make the connections, and so we rely on that heavily. The next level would be schools, principals, and school level communication. This asset map is specifically for district. These are district assets. That's not to say teachers and parents aren't included, but these are district groups and stakeholders groups. So there are school level assets that aren't listed. This is specifically at the district level. Let me see. And then the assets that are in teal and this is where I want to engage Dr. Keeling. In March, April, there were 7 subcommittees. It might be more of April, but there were 7 subcommittees formed. And the purpose of those subcommittees, as they are titled as a collective, is to accelerate learning and close achievement gaps. And so they were very much focused on equity, very much focused on who are the students we're not serving, who are the students that are underperforming, and how do we close those gaps. And then COVID happened, and we were in a space where we had to figure out how to reopen schools, and the governor had not made his announcement. And so these 7 committees were there, and they were tapped into to help us reopen schools. And they did a great job, and they're still doing that work, and they meet regularly. But we want to get back to these 7 groups, which they do focus on equity, and that is their task. That is what they were tasked with. And I know that I've heard several of you comment on groups that maybe were missing, and I think that these 7 could potentially help accomplish some of the district level tasks. These groups are very much beyond the transactional piece. These groups are and can and should be focused on outcomes and ultimately conditional change. Because if we want to tackle any of these 4 equity district priorities, there has to be a conditional change. It cannot be dependent upon the principal, and the principal leaves and there it went. It cannot be dependent, frankly, on the superintendent or even a board member, because ultimately a conditional change, if we're going to change equity, if we're going to increase literacy, it requires everyone in a concerted effort. So I'm going to, if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask, but I'm going to, well, let me pause if anyone has any questions about this map, and then if there are any concerns about it.
I don't have a concern, so to speak. I'm glad we are putting together the different communications and, the targets and things. The one thing I don't want to lose track of, and this is just my opinion, is the relationship building, right? Because, when you talk about transactional items, yes, they got that, but they're also building the relationship with the, principal or the teacher, and they makes them feel more welcome, and they feel like they're part of it because somebody remembered their name and is acknowledging them. So, that's one of the things that I think, a lot of people in the community like about our schools is that we build those relationships. And I think that's a key underlining inequity, is making sure that everybody's getting that relationship and it's being built. And so I don't necessarily want to track it in a chart, but I want to make sure that we're actually, we're focused on building those relationships so people feel like they have, advocacy at all levels of the school, and that people feel like they're part of the school. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, I just would.
You want to go, Bonnie?
No, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, just to plus one on what Will was just saying. First of all, I think this is such a wonderful thing to have and build from. So I'm very excited about this. At the school level and the teacher level, because that is so core, like what I have observed is really different effectiveness of communication from teachers, teacher to teacher, and from school to school. I know Will and I have talked about at a couple of different elementary schools, just like how prepared as a parent you feel given the welcome back to school information from one school friend to another can feel really different. And so there's something about even if that's not sort of the primary focus of the central team, how are we spreading best practices, teacher to teacher, school to school? How are they having, seeing what others are doing and learning from that? I think we've seen a lot of, you know, a different school administrator comes in and everyone, all the parents are like, everything is so much better because I feel so much better about these communications from this school. And there's something there about what are people doing that I hope, and this may already be happening, but I just think there's a real opportunity to improve the experience for families if we're spreading more of those best practices.
Yeah, I just want to build on that. The model I'm used to is what I would call customer relationship management model. And I think our customer relationship is managed at the school level. And that's really strong bias of mine, and I realize it's my opinion, but to some extent, I feel like the district can interfere with those relationships. And in my experience in the business world, you didn't want the bureaucrats, if you will, but you didn't want the folks that are not involved in the relationship to get involved with the relationship unless you were able to filter it in a way that your client could understand it. And, and in the spirit of overwhelming communications and confusion and all that stuff, if we could, to the extent that we can distill communications through the schools, where the trust is and where the relationship is, all of a sudden we have made our schools stronger and our families stronger. So it's a community building model, and I just want to ask that we consider that in our communications, because what I don't want to do is create what I would call a meta communication system that's kind of above the fray or above I don't like the word transact, but the transactional work, if you will. But I don't want to build a whole network above that because I'm not sure how to set up. That's
Well, so Bonnie, one of the things I think I heard from your business lingo was community schools, right? Community schools and how they want to be communicated with. And, I do have the unique position, if you will, that I have two kids that are the same age in different schools, right? So I get to see how different it is. And I'm not saying there's something wrong with it. It's just different, right? They just do it differently. And the communities in each school is slightly different. And I think that's one of the strengths of our school is a lot of the community, right? These are neighborhood kids that grew up together, they're together, and the communication and, how do we, get the strengths of other schools that have learned and see if it can work in those different environments and be more of, community, like you said, community service and, making sure it's community, customer service, if you will, as well. But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a bit of a balance here. So I agree with the what you were saying, Bonnie, about the school level being sort of the heart of it. But also when parents have kids across different schools, getting things that are really, really different is just adds complication. So if the parent is sort of the customer, right, and you're hearing from these different places and they're all very different. So there's things that I think, especially in COVID, we've had to communicate as a whole district from my perspective and coordinate as a district in a different way that I think has been hopeful in cutting through some of that noise. But I do think there is it is important for the sort of center of it, I think, still to be sort of the school communication. But I do see value in that district-wide, especially in the state that we're in right now.
Yeah,
I wonder if we should, Ms. Stowe, hear from the different groups that we were going to focus on in this piece, and then come back to broader questions. I know we have several people waiting to present, and I think there's a lot to digest in this asset map. It's really amazing, and I didn't know it was going to identify all the different components like equity and literacy and culture and climate and community engagement. So I think we're going to have this for more discussion in the next meeting as well. But we have several of these specific groups that we're going to hear about, and I think we should probably go ahead and do that before we do more general questions. Does that make sense, everybody?
Yes, that does make sense. And I just, you know, the point of these assets is in the district work. We are here to serve teachers and principals, and these groups, specifically in Teal, and Dr. Keeling, I'm going to pass to her to talk about those and her work with equity. These groups include classified staff, bus drivers. Some of them include parents, teachers, and the agenda is, what do you need from us? And how do we achieve these 4 goals? So we are very much in a service model, and several folks have mentioned without a relationship, then we can't expect any goals to be achieved. And we recognize that that does occur at the school level. Our job is to serve and support and help them navigate through this time. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Keeling.
I do have to sign off.
Good morning, everyone. I guess to speak to the subcommittees, I think what we can do with the subcommittees at this point is to kind of shift the focus of them and make it broader, because they were initially created to reopen schools, but to reimagine how you open schools, to ensure that equity at the forefront, instead of people often making plans thinking about, oh, we're doing this for all students, and in that all, there's a number of students who never get what they need. Instead, it was supposed to be about, let's start with the students who are always pushed to the margins. Let's start with the families who are always pushed to the margins, create the plan for them, and work backwards from there. And I think that what happened is that in the whole COVID, let's reopen schools, I think people just naturally get back to doing what we always do. But I think at this point, as the show has continued to impress upon us, like, the purpose of these was to make sure that we were focused on centered families and centered students. And so I think we can take these subcommittees and do the work that you are all speaking of, take their focus, identify the families that for your group we have not been reaching, and let's do a better job with reaching those families through your subcommittees. They already include teachers from different schools. They already include administrators from different schools. As Ms. Stowe said, that there are classified and certified staff. And so now I'll take that focus. And also, I think that the subcommittees can look at doing a resource map in their area. And because we have representation from different schools, going back to your schools and doing like this resource map and saying, like, so who are those organizations that we are tapping into? In what ways are we tapping into families as it relates to curriculum, or as it relates to how we hire, or whatever the case might be? So I think it's helpful to hear what the board is saying, because we can now take this back and get what I think I hear you getting at is, let's not just look at the resources at a district level. Let's look at what's happening in schools, and how are schools tapping into families and communities. Exactly. So I think that we can do that now with the subcommittees. That's helpful to me. Ms. Stowe, I didn't know if there was anything else that you wanted me to address in terms of the subcommittee, or that the board had questions around.
I have a question on the subcommittees. Are they meeting right now? Like, are they sort of an active thing that are meeting at this moment? And like, kind of what are those meetings about? I think I'm really interested in those as a vehicle for us, you know, doing more of this collective work on reimagined schools. But I'm just curious, like from your perspective, how are they going right now? Like what's the status?
So from my perspective, and I can let Dr. Gammon speak because he's a chair, Ms. Stowe is a chair, and Ms. Cobb is a chair. But from what I see, it's how do we get schools reopened? So it's kind of, there was a list of tasks that the state put out in that document, and it was making sure that we've accomplished everything that the state said needed to be accomplished to open schools. And then kind of in that process, even as we look towards Plan B, what are some new tasks that are coming up? So I think that that's where the focus has been, but it's like Ms. Stowe said, because it has been so focused on COVID reopening schools, it hasn't been necessarily in every subcommittee enough focus on the reimagining part. It's more of, you know, have we made sure that signage is up? What is the buses going to look like? What is food going to look like? What, in terms of curriculum, much of what we present in the board meetings, what, you know, I'm going to look and online, the teachers what they need. But so from my perspective, when I look in, that's the type of things that I'm seeing happening. But Dr. Gammon, I'll let you talk. I know you guys do talk a lot about equity in your meetings as well.
Sure thing. Thanks, Dr. Keeling. I do know that these committees, they have kind of morphed a little bit, as Dr. Keeling has alluded to. I can speak more specifically around our remote learning subcommittee. You know, we're very much focused on those key priority areas, you know, with literacy and just with remote learning instructional best practices. One thing that Dr. Dawson and I have on the agenda today to discuss, and I can really go ahead and touch on it now because I feel like it's a good segue, is we're in this space now that teachers are now essentially almost 4 weeks into this Plan C of instruction. And so the most critical area for us to focus on now is actually gathering feedback from them. And it's not just a weekly survey feedback, but really having these more intentional focus groups that we want to bring together. Because as you as board members have seen through parent communication, as well as just things that you may have informally had conversations around, an experience for a kindergartner right now may be very different than an experience of a sophomore in high school. And I think that it's critical for us to identify that, to be aware of that. So our goal right now is to utilize these teacher focus groups in really small chunks, because we're trying to really toe that line of teachers have so much on them right now. I mean, and we know this. I mean, whether it's synchronous, asynchronous, juggling their personal lives. I mean, there's just a ton that's going on, and all the while trying to really learn how to reimagine teaching, you know, in a classroom. And so we're looking at having these 45-minute chunks of time where we pull respective groups of folks to gather really intentional feedback, so they have some pre-prep time that they'll be exposed to, so they can come to these meetings and the conversation is very efficient around some target areas. But the hope for us is that we would meet with kindergarten representatives from across all of our schools separately than, say, a first and second grade cohort that we would meet as more of a collective. And then third grade, we would also meet with separately. And then fourth and fifth grade, we will meet with as a cohort. The rationale behind that is a lot of the different technology transitions that happen for kids when they hit kindergarten as well as third grade, some assessment transitions that happen. But we want to get that specific feedback because our remote learning subcommittee in the summer was very much focused on how are we going to get a summer jumpstart camp off and running? How are we going to, you know, establish scheduling with the learning and logistics team just to get the master schedule ready for the year under Plan C? Now that we're in it, we need our teachers to really inform that team so that we can go back and say, all right, so now that we're 4 weeks in, here are some really, really problematic areas that we're seeing, but here are also some really strong, successful stories that we're seeing. And Ms. Smiley, you alluded to it earlier. What better way for us to grow than to do that within? And I think that knowing that you're going to have feedback from across all grade levels and across all schools It's going to help inform the professional development that happens. You can see on the asset map that the remote learning subcommittee is focused on PD. And so they would want to be able to sit back and say, we have teachers that are really having success in these areas with asynchronous instruction. So if we have teachers at another school that maybe have never had a chance in the past even to communicate with this PLC or with these administrators from this building, this space is actually creating an opportunity for us to do that virtually in a way that we just weren't able to do before. And I think that gets back to the heart of the reimagining piece that Dr. Keeling was talking about. So I'm excited about that. I do know that information, whether it comes through a survey or through a focus group, will ultimately then be brought back to the remote learning subcommittee, where we can then say, okay, so what are 2 or 3 just really short-term next steps that we can take as we shift closer potentially to Plan B in that hybrid model, and then what do we want to look at as more of a long-term solution as we don't know how long this situation is going to last. So Dr. Keeling, I don't know if that kind of gets at where we're at and how that has shifted as far as the learning and logistics subcommittee. And I know that I'm not chairing that. Mr. Johnson has done a great job with you, Dr. Keeling, and others. Again, they did a lot around master scheduling with Dr. Dawson to get the year started, but we also are very aware that those schedules may need to be adjusted as we go along. If we get to Plan B, obviously there will be adjustments with that. And so those committees are constantly working together just to make sure that the instruction and the PD are aligning with what the actual day-to-day time looks like.
Dr. Gammon,
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the teacher focus groups, which Dr. Felder had spoken to me about recently. So she did mention that they were optional, and because of the high demand on teachers. And has there been good representation from all the different schools? Has there been able to be kind of broad participation with all those different grade levels as well? Are there teachers from each school participating?
So and just so that and that's a great question from a timeline standpoint. So we met this past week with principals. So we had it started as a K2, K5 principal meeting. We then took it K12 at that point. We had 2 separate breakout sessions where our K5 principals provided feedback on what they hoped those feedback sessions could look like, or those focus groups could look like. That's where we came away with the idea of doing a kindergarten specific first, second combo, et cetera. And then our 6-12 principals had a little bit different take. They were more inclined to want us to target teachers that maybe had been underrepresented on a lot of committees and things in the summer that maybe weren't as engaged with some of the work, because they want to spread the wealth, because there is a lot of just work that's happening for teachers. But they also felt like if we could get more capacity built that way, it's just another leadership opportunity for those folks. So as this month proceeds, we have scheduled meetings that are upcoming. We already have 4 on the calendar, so we're starting by those grade levels. We've yet to have a focus group meeting yet, because I think our belief was, let's pull in at least 3 weeks of teacher survey data. Let's let teachers get settled into their instructional routine. And then let's really have principals provide feedback on when is the best time to do this and how long should we expect teachers to be able to meet or to commit that time. So I do think that if this committee gets back together, and I'm not sure what the timeline is for this group, we could certainly provide an update, a month from now of kind of how this has evolved and how that's informed our subcommittee.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just one general thought. Thank you, Dr. Gammon, for that, and Dr. Keeling. As we're doing these focus groups and things, I guess my push or encouragement continues to be around co-creating. How can we create spaces to co-create things with many staff members as we can, and involve many staff members in the creation itself? And it may have been sort of afraid, but the idea of, I think there are some situations where going out, gathering feedback, and then we bring it behind the curtain and we figure out the best thing to do, and then we present it to you and it's based on your feedback, is not necessarily the best way to build buy-in for those things, right? And that there are, strategies from like design thinking, where you can identify, like, we know X is like a very specific problem that we're having in like kindergarten, right? And you can spend 5 minutes doing a brainstorm. How might we solve this problem? And in a Padlet, everybody puts in their answers, and then you have them vote on it. And in like 10 minutes, you came up with a solution. Like there's some strategies like that, especially from design thinking, that I think are what you could very efficiently gather a lot of like ideas and solutions to problems. So we don't need to get into like the details of how you're designing these sessions or anything. I guess my push and encouragement is just to, the more staff we can actually involve in solving the problems with us, as opposed to us solving them and then presenting it to them, the better buy-in I think you're going to have from staff members, and the better solutions, like just the better solutions also, I'll say.
So I don't know if people are gonna need a break shortly, and please, if you need to excuse yourself, please do. But Dr. Keeling, we were also, I'd also like to hear a little bit about the student-led equity groups at the high schools. And then Ms. McKenzie was gonna talk about student discipline groups as well. That all sort of ties into this asset.
Right. So right now we have an active student equity team at Orange High. They have about 50 students on their roster. It is an open meeting, so they advertise the meetings the same way that they advertise all of their clubs that are meeting throughout the week. Once students come and attend, then they are added to the roster, and then the chairs of that committee send out emails to whoever showed up, and kind of as a heads up, we're having a meeting, and then, as I said, it's also advertised. And then the team comes together, they set their agenda for the year. What are the areas of inequity that we've identified in the school? What are some things that we want to do as a student team to address that? We had a few students who spoke at a board meeting before COVID last year, and they presented to the board what their recommendations were as it relates to equity. I would like to continue to have that, to create that platform for them to come back and say, these are the things that are happening in our schools, and that we would like to see the district and the board and the community even do about those things. Cedar Ridge is in the process right now of getting their team organized. And so they are going to use the same thing, make it an open invitation. Anyone who is interested can come in and join. They also have a couple of students who they know have been active in social justice type movements throughout the summer, and have expressed interest in some clubs and organizations around social justice and equity. So they're gonna tap into those students and ask those students to also help them get the word out. And then once they get that group of students together, then they're gonna have those students meet with their school-based equity team and kind of talk them through the same process. What Orange High did was had a student panel who presented to the entire staff and said, this is what my experience has been like while I've been at Orange High. These are some of the things that have happened. These are things that have been said and done. And these are some, or that I have witnessed. And again, these are the things that we would like to see done. And so Cedar Ridge is going to do that same thing. They're going to set up a student panel, have them present to the staff. This is what it's been like being a student at Cedar Ridge. Here's what we'd like to see happen. And so we'll go from there. And then we have to get partnership up and going next. And then I plan to have all of the student groups to be trained through our Courageous Conversations contract work with them. They have training that they call SOAR, that is for students to help them learn how to be equity leaders and social justice leaders, and just giving them that training of what do we do, how do we get students involved, how do we get our voice heard, etc. So that's kind of what that process is going to look like this year for students.
Thank you. That's exciting. I didn't know about the panels of students presenting to staff. So just to, in that asset map, so it is mentioned that there's the school-based equity teams, and that's staff, I believe, right? And then there's the equity task force, which we're going to hear about next. And then there's the student equity team. So there's several equity-related groups associated with the schools.
Yes.
Anyone else have questions or comments for Dr. Keeling?
I'll just say it was, I was very pleased to have a student come and present and share all of their activities and concerns, and, you know, also having, you know, the former teacher of the year there by their side, you know, advocating for the students as well, not speaking for the students, but advocating, was very refreshing. And I hope we will see more of that.
Dr. Keeling, do you want to speak to the presentation that the students made to the Equity Task Force?
So I didn't know if I should discuss it now or when we got to the task force. So it's up to you. You all tell me.
You can wait. Got ahead of you.
I do have a question, and we're going to have a lot of questions like this. I feel like we're going to leave this meeting with lots of questions and ideas, but one of which is how, like, where is it appropriate for board members to listen into some of these engagement type situations? But if it's happening soon, could you think about, would it be appropriate to allow board members to listen in on the student panel speaking at Cedar Ridge High School? Would the students not be comfortable with that? Or is there a way we could, as a board, also hear some of that conversation? I don't know if you're ready to answer that now, or if you want to think about it and get back to us, but that's the type of thing I would love to hear what they have to say about their experiences.
Me too.
Yeah, let me reflect on it. The best way for us to do that. Yeah, let me reflect on it.
Thank you for figuring that out, Dr. Keeling. I just wanted to echo my general sort of eagerness to figure out ways to hear more about the experiences of students who have, especially who have encountered challenges in our system, and because of the ways that it has not worked for kids of color in particular, and just not being sure as a board member of the best ways to do that. So that more broadly, I think, is an interest for me. How do we as board members engage with kids and, like, hear firsthand about, you know, the things that have been really helpful to them, mentors. And, you know, I've heard stories from some individual students over time of people who've broken down a barrier for them, or said, like, don't anybody tell you can't register for that higher math class, you know? And then on the other side, you know, kids who've experienced other things.
So, like, my initial thought as I sit here is that would probably be better for them to present to the board the way they did, because in those panels, they speak very specifically about classes and like certain classes where things have happened. And it's kind of like Ms. Hauser was saying, like, when a board member shows up, like, a dynamic shifts and people start worrying about their job, is it at stake? And there was a good dialogue between the staff and the students at Orange High. So they were able to say, these are the things that I've experienced, and the staff was able to respond around that, like, wow, I didn't know, or I'm sorry for that. Like, you know, so I don't know if that organic dialogue would still be present if a board member is in there. So it kind of makes me, as I'm thinking about it right now, feel better for them to be able to collect up everything that we've kind of experienced, and let's present that to the board around, here's what it is in general, as opposed to the more specific that happens in the panel setting.
That makes sense. Thank you. Should we move on? Ms. McKenzie, do you want to talk about student discipline groups? And Dr. Keeling, we also have you up for the Equity Task Force review. Are you okay with this timing? We shifted a little bit late. Are we okay with your timing for today?
Yeah, I'm here all day. So you have
Okay,
to
all
let me
right.
know.
Okay. So Ms. McKenzie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Doyle. So I just thought this would be a good moment for us to briefly talk about a discipline task force. I think the board is all aware that district staff met with Sheriff Blackwood and sort of had an initial conversation where we all got on the same page that there is this conversation in our country and on a somewhat local level also around policing and justice. And so Dr. Felder had already started some work around this with, proactively understanding that we have had requests from community members and students around assessing the use of SROs. So after sort of considering, and all of you have seen the resolution for Monday, the proposal is to sort of have a task force that would make recommendations to the board around student discipline a little more generally, so that it could dig into in-school and out-of-school suspensions and referrals to justice programs. I've had a parent reach out to me before wondering sort of how equitably those referrals are being made, and also just sort of digging in and understanding the roles of SROs and making recommendations to the board about whether we want to keep the program exactly as it is or tweak things to better meet the needs of our students in our community. So just wanted to have a moment to discuss that and see sort of what the board thinks about it.
Could you elaborate, Ms. McKenzie, on who's in that task force?
So I don't think that the task force has really been exactly created. I'll have Dr. Keeling and Dr. Felder maybe speak to this. Currently, it was some cabinet level staff members, Dr. Felder and myself, that met with Sheriff Blackwood. But I imagine if we sort of create a task force, it won't necessarily be that exact group. I know the commissioners would like to have a liaison on the committee. They're interested in this topic. And I personally would like to see justice impacted families and students possibly on this committee. Dr. Felder, Dr. Keeling, do you want to add to that?
Sure. So you are spot on, Mrs. McKenzie. We didn't form a task force yet. We talked about the need to have one. And I believe at that meeting, we started brainstorming like who should be at the table. And I would invite Ms. Cobb to jump on as well, because she's going to help support that work. But we certainly talked about needing students at the table. We talked about parents and again, just a broad range of voices and perspectives to have at the table. And everyone was very, very open to like the more the merrier. So I don't think there will be any concerns there, but we all agreed that this was important and something that we needed to do. I can also share, and Ms. Cobb can also speak to the fact that on the student survey, the SEL survey, there are going to be specific questions as one way to get students' perspective about their experience with SROs. So the survey and not all students. Ms. Cobbs, can you speak to the grade range or band that will get those particular questions? But again, it's a way to gather a perspective. That was just one vehicle we were using to do that.
Yeah. So Ms. Cobb, I didn't realize. Oh, Ms. Cobb, I didn't realize you were on the call. I'm sorry I didn't name you as a reference for that group, because I certainly know that you were aware and leading that work. So my apologies.
It's fine. It's fine. We will be administering a survey that will start on Monday for our students. It will be a 3-5 portion to that survey, but the portion that speaks to SROs will be the students in grades 6 through 12, and it will ask generalized questions around how do you feel about SROs being in your building. And it's very general so that we can kind of get a feel for, what are kids thinking when they see these officers in their building? Are they, have they bonded with them? Do they have relationships with them? Are they fearful of them? And those kinds of things. And then, as Dr. Felder has said, and Ms. McKenzie, we will be looking at how we choose the students and families, staff, as well as community members to be a part of that task force. And we are working to get that set up as soon as possible.
That's so excellent. I'm so glad our students are getting the opportunity to even think about these questions for themselves and answer them. I think that's really good for their mental health. Any other questions for Ms. McKenzie? Or staff members involved with that? Do people want a break, or what do you think? We have the equity task force. I'm actually kind of skipping. We were going to talk at this point in reference to the asset map about stakeholder groups that we sort of identified that we desire, or recognize we need to hear from. And sort of the first question where the board members were brainstorming, a lot of those community people are mentioned in the asset map. So at some point, I want us to go through and think about missing stakeholders at this point, or people or stakeholders that we would like more conversation with. But I feel like we should shift that for now and hear specifically about the equity task force. So do people want a break, or would you rather do that first?
Maybe we could do a 5-minute break, like a quick break.
Sure.
And maybe we could all just look at the asset map and send you, Ms. Doyle, maybe, or someone, thoughts about if there are other groups that we think might be missing or something, or we can move it to the next committee meeting. But
yeah, I actually, so board members with more experience than me, can you let me know, is that, I'm taking notes, and can I share without having a board meeting over email? I'd love to gather feedback and just start compiling it and then getting that ready for the next meeting. Does that sound good?
Yeah, Carrie, all you have to do is send it to us and ask us to only respond back to you. And then you collect it, and then it could be posted as part of the meeting minutes, or just share it as a final.
As long as we're not going back and forth and sort of digging into it and having sort of a group conversation via email, it's fine if we do it that way.
Okay, great. So let's do that offline and take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and hear about the equity task force. So at like 11:02. Sorry, I lost track of time. It's 11:05. But we can wait another minute or two if people are, oh, there's Dr. Keeling. All right, so one reason why we asked you, Dr. Keeling, to talk about the Equity Task Force is we were starting to have conversations about task forces and as well as being particularly interested in the Equity Task Force, but as it is a body designed, I guess, to inform the board, I'd like to hear about sort of its history, how it's changed as maybe other things have changed in the district, how membership functions, and some of that is as we're thinking about other advisory type groups, how we could use this as a model or what you've learned in the process. So I'll just pass it to you. Thank you.
Okay, so the Equity Task Force was created before I got here. And so I might have to ask Mr. Johnson and Ms. Cobb to speak to like the entire history of it and what it was initially created around, and then I will come back in and pick back up. So Mr. Johnson or Ms. Cobb, can you kind of give a history, because they were on the team from the beginning?
So I can start. Jason, you can chime in. Around the time when there were conversations with the board and the community around the dress code and the Confederate flag, there was a need or a request that an equity task force be formed. And so based on administration at that time, a task force was formed to kind of look at all of the racial things that were happening in the district, as well as the conversations around the flag and those kinds of things. And so out of that came the task force. It began like an open meeting. There were quite a few community members involved in that, as well as staff. And then it got kind of shaped into what we have now, where we had community and school staff that sit on that panel and started working on an equity policy for our district and wording of that policy and how we would place that, as well as looking at discipline in our district along racial lines. Jason, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think you covered it all, Sharita. Thank you.
Okay, so when I got here, I was trying to figure out for myself, again, since the committee was already formed, the task force was formed before I got here, kind of what is the next step, because it seemed like initially the task force was created, much like Ms. Cobb and Mr. Johnson said around getting the policy written. I think normally when you have a task force, they have a goal, and it's usually a time that's put on the task force. And so I felt like they had accomplished the goals that it was initially set for, but it was also written into the equity policy that the task force would continue. So I think for me, trying to lead the task force last year and trying to learn the district, it was a little difficult to figure out how can I best utilize this team. So this year, I feel like we're in a much better position, much more solid position. One of the things that we did last year was to create bylaws. We were also in the process of adding some new members, because as Ms. Cobb said, over the years, the membership dwindled down. So COVID hit, like literally the application was going to be due March 31st. And so COVID hit, so that ended that. So we'll pick that back up this year to bring in more members, because it is supposed to be a diverse team, and we don't have representation from all of our different like student groups and stakeholder groups. And so we're going to expand membership. Just looking on some of my notes here. And there will be OCS staff, classified and certified. It will be open to staff, to parents, to community members, and within community members, there is community agencies and organizations that directly work with or serve Orange County students and families. And then there's also community members who reside in the OCS district. So we want to tap into some organizations if they would like to have members to represent their organization to serve on the task force, as well as just members of the community who live in our district who would like to be members of the task force. There will be OCS leadership on the task force. So that would be like cabinet members, school administrators, other district level leadership if they would like to be a member. And then we will have students. So we'll have student representation from each of the high schools. And again, because they have those student equity teams and they will have gone through training, so we felt like that would be very appropriate to have the high school students to serve on the team. One of the things about the equity team is it's not just a group of people who are diverse. It is a group of people who are really committed to equity and have some knowledge of equity. It's not just that you have to know everything about equity to be on the team, but you want to have a team who can look to see where are the blind spots, where are the holes, where are the inequities. So for example, when the policy committee has like the gender support policy or guidelines, you want to be able to take that back to the equity task force, and the team knows enough about equity issues that they can identify what might be missing. Or when you do like this committee, for example, the equity task force would be able to say, so here are the stakeholders that you're not reaching. Or, you know, we attended last week's board meeting, and at the board meeting, we noticed that this was presented, or this was done in this way. And the task force would be able to say, this is why this group of parents didn't show up, because we never knew about it, you know. So like, for example, I was thinking about like the office hours that you all hold and wondering like, how is that publicized? Where is that posted? Are all parents aware of that? So the equity task force purpose is to advise and make recommendations to the board and to the superintendent. So it's kind of like an overview of the purpose, the membership, and where we're heading in terms of getting members in. The current task force members are the same ones that presented to the board back in February, I believe it was. We held our first meeting of this year back on the 31st of August. And in that meeting, we met with the Orange High student panel, much like I think you were asking for, Ms. Doyle and Ms. Smiley. They presented to the task force, here's what our experience has been like, and here are some of the things that we're recommending and that we would like to see happen within the district. It was very powerful for the task force. I also had the equity leads to attend that task force meeting. So as you know, you have your school-based equity teams. Each of those equity teams has one or two staff members who are leading the team. And so I invited them to come so they could also hear from students, because the students talked about their experiences matriculating through Orange County schools. They didn't just talk about this is what happened last year at Orange High. They were talking about, and this is what happened in what it felt like for me in elementary school, and how I didn't at middle school get recommended for the honors classes, and how my mom had to fight to get me into those. So they talked about their different experiences, elementary, middle, high. And so the equity leads representing schools from every level across the district were able to hear that and say, like, let's go back to our schools and talk about the experiences that our students have had as they came through Orange County schools. So the next step for the task force will be to revisit some of the recommendations that was made to the board back in February. Ahead of that meeting, the board had a list of questions that they wanted the task force to consider in the presentation. And from that, there were some questions around what are some things that we can be doing differently? What are you noticing? And so we're going to revisit that. And within the policy, it says that there's at least one joint meeting between the task force and the school board. And I'm hoping that it will not just be one. I'm hoping to maybe have one in the fall and then another one in the spring. And so in the coming months, maybe in like an October meeting will be for the equity task force to be able to present to the board those recommendations. I think that was everything. So if you all have questions for me, or if anyone, again, Mr. Johnson and Ms. Cobb are still on the team, if they think of anything that I missed, then please speak up.
Thank you so much for that work, Dr. Keeling. It's so helpful and encouraging to hear about.
I agree. One thing I'm really excited that we're getting it off the ground again in terms of new membership and everything, and sort of like revisiting purpose and all of that, I think is really, really exciting. And just thinking, when I think about these different bodies that are getting started and the ways that they can connect and sort of build together and inform each other, I think that's really exciting. I also think it's just a great, it was just, you were speaking to the people on the task force really understanding and having depth of, I think commitment, understanding to equity. And I was just thinking about the, I think that's a great call. Like just thinking about, the value of expertise and like expert advising, right? Like if this is supposed to advise the board, that idea of like expertise, either sort of in the subject as a whole or in like lived experiences, and just how that's really what's going to help me as a board member, like really glean the most from it is like people bringing expertise. So glad that that's going to be a focus of yours. Yeah. When do we think Go ahead.
Go ahead.
When do you think you're going to open up the applications again for new members and sort of have that piece happen?
It's like I want to get this done, like up, but I have to go back and change deadlines, and there were some advising from the task force around like even having a separate email set up so that people can submit it. And I think now in COVID, like making sure, working with Ms. Stowe to get the word out in the best way so that everyone is made aware of it. So I would like to get it up and running by October, and to just use this time to like really make sure that we're communicating it. I already know that the Spanish speaking families have already asked, is this something that's open to us? And I'm like, definitely it's open to you. So yeah, so I think some of the word is kind of already out, but I just want to make sure that people really know about it.
Yeah, thanks.
That speaks to what I was going to ask. So originally had the kind of Confederate flag and that sort of beginning, but so it has broadened. Is it also including kids of different levels of ability? Is it including LGBTQ students, or is it still primarily like race focused?
No, it's equity focused. So on our team right now, we have Connie Crimmins, who is over EC. She wasn't initially on the team. It was when I came in that I started to see where there were some gaps. And so for the time being, I filled it with district people so that they could speak and have voice for student groups that are not represented. We have Sandra Blefko, who wasn't originally on the team, but I asked her to come in so that we would have Latinx family and Spanish-speaking families represented. We didn't have any Latinx members on the team. So I'm trying to think who else did I add into the committee. But anyway, no, it is not just focused on race. It is focused on really our centered students. So when we keep talking about our centered student populations, that's really who the target group is right now. I think you also asked around how can this team advise the other teams, or like, can you give me more about?
Well, for example, I don't know that this is going to happen, but something a couple of us had conversation about was, would we, need or want as a board to have like a Latinx advisory council of sorts that the board interacted with somehow. And so then there was just this is just sort of offline one-on-one conversation, but how would you do that? How do you have rotation of members? How do you broadly invite people or give different people opportunities? So I guess some of it was just a membership conversation. How do you rotate members or different community members in particular, whereas the staff members might be more permanent. But how is there a rotation of membership opportunity?
So when I came in, that was not in place. So as part of this membership process, it's a 2-year commitment, and it is a rotation. So it will be half of the members that will come in this year, along with the current equity task force. So it'll be about a 24-member team. And then at the end of this year, the current equity task force members would rotate off, and we would bring in the second half of people. Now, in that second half, well, when you rotate off, I believe it says in the bylaws that you stay off for at least a year before you reapply to come back on the team. So that would be the rotation. It's a 2-year commitment. You rotate off half and half so that it's never a full new team. There's at least that year in there where people are working together. And there's this year for the current task force to be able to do some work and kind of help me train the new members that are coming in.
And I think we had approved, I don't know if it was approved or FYI, some bylaws within the past 6 months at some point. And so maybe we could share those with the new board members as well, because I know they have some of those details in it.
Got it. I will say that one challenge in terms of having a task force that is created by the board is that the conversation around open meetings, and the equity task force has really struggled with that, because I think when they first started, there were a number of people who came in just to kind of see and hear what was going on, and then to go back and not necessarily have positive and things to say that were going to advance the cause. And so I think whenever you create a task force that's under the board, that part is hard, particularly right now around the equity task force. We just don't have an environment right now where people can have safe conversations about race and inequity. Especially in this Zoom bombing type environment. I'm very concerned about that, which, in transparency is why I didn't post the meeting right now, because we're just not at a place right now where we can safely meet and address these issues and people not come in and disrupt. So that is something that I would say as you consider creating your task force and your committees, how can they have these safe, authentic conversations, without fear of like any kind of not the pushback is fine, like the harm that happens really.
Thank you. Good points. Any other questions for Dr. Keeling?
Just a thought that are the task force meetings, if the task force meetings are like required to be open meetings posted the way that ours are or something like that, and that is holding back the work of doing it effectively, that I would hope, if that's the case in like a substantial way, then I think we could explore shifting it from being a committee or a task force of the board. Because there are all kinds of advisory groups that the district has had, student advisory groups and teacher advisory groups in the past that have not needed to be open meetings. And so to me, there's like power in it being in this policy that this body exists to advise this district and the board. But if it actually is like hindering the functioning of it, I think we should look at that.
But this could be resolved very easily, though. If the task force was made and it was done through WebEx and they were the panels and everybody else in the community could call in as just residents, they couldn't bomb, right? The issue is Zoom. So with Zoom, you have to issue the full information and everybody has the same rights. But just like this meeting, we're panelists, anybody can join, but if they join, they're just listen only. So there's an easy fix to this. All we need to do is manage it just like we're doing this meeting. And they're not going to have the people that jump in and do that. It will be very structured. So I think we should just pursue that.
So I think you are spot on, Mr. Atherton, with regards to Zoom bombings. But I think what the concern that, having participated in these meetings, the concern that Dr. Keeling is raising is much larger than someone can crash the meeting and do something ridiculous. It's about, it comes down to this, and Dr. Keeling, please correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be, but it comes down to, do you have a meeting so you say you can check that box? We're meeting with this group. We've convened this group, and they're not in a space where they can be authentic and speak their truth. If we're not getting, we're doing engagement light. We are just checking boxes. Yeah, we meet with this group, we meet with it, but they're not telling. It's out in the parking lot when they don't have a camera on them and 50 zillion people listening in who take their information and construct it or construe it in a way that is totally different. When their faces are on Facebook and there are postings about them, nobody has time for that or wants to engage in that way. So I think that that's what Dr. Keeling is trying to convey, that there's important work to be done. And the current structure is a struggle because we've got members on the team that said, listen, I'm not going to speak my truth. You got to think about the history, the relationship. This is deep. It runs very, 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 very deep. And it may take a long time before people feel that level of comfort, particularly people of color. And I'll just put it out there.
Right, but so what you're saying then, Dr. Felder, if I just say it differently, is this needs to be more in person where people feel safer in an environment versus, like you said, electronic. It can always be recorded. There's, other things. People may not feel comfortable because they don't see or hear everybody that's on there. So I think I understand what you're saying, but it sounds like we have a limitation of COVID, if you will.
Well, I would say that even in person, people make recordings. I think in person, people, if it's still a board level meeting, a public meeting, people can still show up.
Yeah.
That's the issue. Dr. Keeling, correct me if I'm wrong, because maybe I'm not.
No, I think that what you have to understand is that some policies in and of themselves create an inequity and have a disparate impact. And when you have this committee as your board, as under the board, and you have a policy that says it has to be open, then it is negatively impacting the work of the committee. And so as a board who is focused on equity, you have to say, what shifts do we need to make to ensure that the work can get done the way the work needs to be done, recognizing that this policy isn't going to work right now. And so I think what Ms. Smiley is saying is spot on. It needs to be re-looked at as, do we need to continue to have this as the task force under the board, which would require it to be open meeting? Or do we need to look at a way to continue to have this as a committee that needs to stand, but does not need to fall under this open meeting? It's like Dr. Felder said, like, we have a history in this district. It hasn't been an equitable district. You know, that's not what this historically has been. And so part of our work right now has to be to change that, especially when we're talking in this committee, right? Like, you have a history of pockets who do not trust this community. I mean, do not trust this district. And we're not going to get them to a place of trust by saying, well, policy says got to be open meetings, so just talk about it. You know, well, that's not what we're going to do, right? We have to say, how do we make sure that we are making this a safe environment so that the work can get done the way the work needs to be done?
Yeah,
And-
the only other
Exactly.
question I have, and not necessarily we need to have it here, of course, is, you know, Dr. Felder, you even said that people are concerned that in-person things are recorded, et cetera. I mean, that wouldn't be fixed by making it and by the way, I'm not against not having it open and all that. I'm just trying to make sure how this would work. Are we saying we would do smaller engagements with individuals and so they feel comfortable, or, you know, because I mean, I think the power of this group is having everybody share their experiences and know they're not alone and that these things need to be addressed.
You're right.
Anyway.
So let me clarify, Mr. Abington, thank you for asking that question. What I'm saying is that in an open meeting format, people can still record. I would like to think that people who are part of the task force are not recording each other. I mean, they have notes. They can take their own notes. They're right there. So it's not, it's when it's not organic. These meetings are not organic meetings. I know why they exist the way that they exist, and there's a place for them, hence this meeting. But every meeting can't be, particularly when you're trying to engage certain groups in the community who have a historic trust issues and other issues, that it's just going to make it that you may get some to show up, but they're not going to be their true self. We saw that at the Listen and Learns.
Yeah.
I don't know if you paid attention at the Listen and Learns. I'm going to speak for people who look like me. Some of them came, but they were among the most. Mrs. Smiley, you're shaking your head in agreement because you know they didn't pick up. Why? They sent me notes on the card. They would come over to me and like hand it to me and talk to me personally, but they weren't going to speak in that group. They didn't trust it. They came, they're listening. Like, what is this about? Are they really about what? It's all of that. And it is deep. It runs very deep here. We got to respect that. We've got to honor that. We've got to know it. And if we are serious about equity work here, that's why I'm here. If we're not, let me know. If we're serious about the equity work here, we can't do it in a textbook format, right? We've got to do things differently. And to simply shift this from under the board so the people can have this space that they need to speak freely and speak their truth and problem solve, because that's what they do. They're a good group around that. Problem solve, if that's the ultimate goal, we're just saying it's not going to happen like this. So it's in the hands of the board to decide, what do you want?
So
Because we're giving you that feedback.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for giving, you know, us the clarity on this, because, you know, it has never been brought up or a concern. And I'm definitely supportive of making the changes, because if it's not effective, we don't need to check a box. We want to get results and people feel comfortable and that our community is thriving as a whole. So thank you for taking the time to go through that.
So I just want to jump in here and also say that the Equity Task Force, even though it was born of this community conversation, which was led by people of color, what happened was that the history of this is that the district responded, and a white superintendent and a white chair of the board at the time appointed the task force. And so the inherent, the way that it was created creates a problematic structure from the jump. And I think that this is such an important conversation that's been elevated, and I so appreciate the labor of Dr. Keeling and Dr. Felder to explain all of this to the board, that we really do need to revisit it. I think Dr. Keeling, you know, I don't think that a predominantly white board can then figure out how we do better. So I would ask, I mean, without guidance from the people affected in the group. So I wonder if there's a way that the Equity Task Force and you could bring a recommendation to us or engage with us around how we can structure this to create a safe space for this group, because I do believe that we all really value the feedback and want to create safe spaces. And I know that often that means I can't be there, and I'm cool with that. I just want to do whatever we can to create those spaces and make sure that we are elevating the recommendations that the group wants to bring to the board so that we can do effective work as a district.
Yeah, and it was the recommendation of the Equity Task Force when creating that policy that this be in it, right? Like that this task force will remain to see the work through and advise the board and the superintendent. So it was the work of that group, but I don't think that it came with an understanding of this like open meetings complication, and actually that I don't know that they would have made the same recommendation if they understood all of that. So just to add that piece to it.
Yeah.
And could I just jump in just for just a gentle reminder, and maybe not so gentle, that when we are truly trying to do equity work, that this is an opportunity for us to really get at the systemic barriers, right? The systemic inequities that exist, for us to break that barrier down. So, and that really has to look at the policy level, right? So I really encourage us to keep looking at how are we approaching this policy through the lens of equity to remove the systemic barriers that continue the inequities. And I think that this is a small but a really important opportunity for us to bring down one of those barriers by really listening to what Dr. Keeling and Dr. Felder is sharing. And again, it's not about what's going to make us feel good, but what is in the best interest of those whom we're trying to serve. And if we're really truly meaning equity, then people who are in positions to change policy, to get rid of the systemic barriers, I think that is a true act that this board can take to really show your commitment to equity and what enacting equity means.
And I will also just add that, like, another example of this is the equity policy, right? The Equity Task Force crafted a policy. And after I speak, I saw Mr. Johnson jumped in, and I'm going to let him talk if he needs to. I'm sorry, Ms. Doyle. I don't want to hijack the meeting, but the policy that they gave over was not the policy that exists right now, right? So when I was going through the policy with them and I said things like, so what did you all mean when you said this? Like, right, this is what it says. I want to make sure I understand it. They were like, what are you talking about? Like, we never said that. So when you talk about like what Dr. Dawson is saying in terms of like systemic, looking systemically at where are the inequities, for one, it's their voice was then watered down by legal, right? So when we got turned over to the attorneys, the spirit of even what they were trying to put in the policy didn't fully stand. So even to what Ms. McKenzie said, you have lawyers that represent the district that are white and then you have the white superintendent, you have the white chair. And so then what comes back is like, wait, this isn't even what we said, you know? So all of that, those are things that we have to now unpack as part of this process, like Dr. Dawson is saying. So Mr. Johnson, you came on camera. I didn't know, because you've been in the task force for a while, if there's something that you wanted to say.
Well, I was going to speak from a historical perspective now, and we've kind of moved on from that, but I was going to talk from a historical perspective from the open meetings. And I just want to let people know the very first meeting we had as a task force, it was an open meeting, and we had 4 or 5 people get up and walk out as a result of that because they did not feel safe. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Well, I'm really personally so grateful for this space to have this conversation. And as the policy chair this year, I think this is very worthy of revisiting. Dr. Keeling, you and I have had some conversations about an explicit policy around race. And I look forward to us engaging with this further. So thank you to everyone.
I want to thank everyone for their honesty and openness, and I'm so glad that this conversation has come into this meeting. And agreeing with Ms. McKenzie, it sounds like this is something that will come forward to the policy committee, but I would definitely be wanting to see feedback of recommendations as she suggested.
Thank you. And I appreciate you all as a board being open to equity and looking at, like, where do we need to make some changes. It definitely helps to make the work doesn't get easier, but it's definitely helpful to feel supported in doing the work. So thank you all for that.
Any more comments about the equity task force before we kind of wrap up a little bit with we're going to digest what we are exactly as a committee and recommendations to bring to the full board or to think about for our next meeting. Okay, thank you again, Ms. Cobb, Mr. Johnson, Dr. Keeling, and Dr. Felder, and Dr. Dawson, about your honest sharing on the equity task force and some of the problems we need to deal with to make that a more safe place in terms of how it advises the board. So as we think about this committee, we have work to do. We have a lot to digest about the asset map, and there were a lot of great suggestions at the beginning, some of which I hope, I might be naive here, but some I don't think would be as staff heavy as others. So one thing that I want us to do as a committee as we move on is, I've tabulated, and I'll share what I've tabulated with all the ideas of what we could do to engage in the community. Speaking to what Mr. Atherton was saying about just the need to have that feeling of welcome for people. I mean, that's part of what this is. And then there's also the component that's, are we hearing from different stakeholders, and how can we do that? How can we, well, here's a great example with the equity task force and the student equity groups. We'd love to hear, we'd love to be a fly on the wall in some of these meetings, but sometimes that's not the best way. So sometimes we should wait for the summary or for someone who's comfortable reporting to the board. And it's good to know that we're going to have hopefully a fall and spring meeting where the equity task force presents to the board. That's excellent. But so, Mr. Atherton, do you have comments about where you see us boiling down what we are as a committee? I'm tagging you because Ms. Moore had to step off the call.
That's okay. I think we have a lot of really great ideas. I mean, just a suggestion is us to take and split those up into short-term and long-term goals, because some of them are going to take much longer. And if we can get more benefit quicker, I think we should identify those and just to, figure out, things that we can do in the remote environment and then things we can do in person, because we're guaranteed we're going to have to do some kind of transition, right? Where, hey, these short-term things might be very easy right now, but then they get more difficult, or we may have to figure out how we can, engage in different manners. But I think there's lots of great ideas. It's going to just be a matter of figuring out, how we execute those. I think the other thing too that was discussed, Ms. Smiley and Ms. Hauser talked about it, was the different levels of these, right? There's the school level, the district level, and us making sure where the goal of that is, right, in reaching people. And I think we should probably consider seeing if we can bring in some people to speak to us as well as a group, right? Whether it's students, maybe Dr. Keeling, we get some of the student equity groups to come and speak to us, and maybe it'll be less intimidating, if you will, to come speak to a smaller group and just get some of their ideas and thoughts as well. Anyway, just my thoughts off the cuff.
May I just share that when I last spoke with at the last equity task meeting, I charged our students to be relentless in their pursuit for equity and justice, and to hold us adults accountable. So I think that, if we create the space for them, they are eager, willing, and ready to hold us accountable. So I just hope that we will step up and not let them down. So I think, Mr. Atherton, I think they'd be more than willing to school us. And they asked for 4 simple things, and I think they'd be more than willing to reiterate that for us. And I'm sure Dr. Keeling will work on how to make that work.
Excellent.
Great. Other board members have things to add, and I'm thinking about anything to, aside from summarizing and processing and sorting into short-term and long-term. Is there anything we need to be preparing to bring to the full board, or is it just things we need to process before our next committee meeting?
I mean, I think during a board comment, you can just update that, we had a great discussion, lots of ideas. And as we, put this in, when you send out the notes and once you get them combined, you'll share it with the full board. I think that's the best way, just to update, and that way the community can hear, we're moving forward on this as well. Just my thoughts. Others?
Yeah,
I do like. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Just one thing I'm realizing for these meetings potentially at some point is, depending on as the strategic plan for the district's getting developed, I'm imagining there is some portion of it that is around community stakeholder engagement. And so this meeting potentially being a place to sort of workshop some of that, or, for the board to get some opportunity to weigh in on that. Yeah.
I'm wondering, I do like Mr. Atherton's ideas about the virtual board member office hours being sort of organized. I wonder if we can sort of organize that on the side. Although if we get to where we're talking about translation services, then we're talking about staff resources. So that is something I'd like to organize in the short term.
If you put that in the notes of what you send out to the board, Ms. Doyle, I can potentially put office hours as an agenda item on the September 28th meeting. And we could, you know, have a public conversation about how we want to do that. Do we want to have translation services? Do we want to rotate board members? Where are we going to post it? And kind of work through all of that, because I think that's a meaningful conversation for us to have.
Great idea.
Okay, any other comments before we close?
I just want to say again, Ms. Stowe, how valuable I think this asset map, and I'm sure several people, probably lots of people on the call contributed to it, but this just seems so valuable to be able to see all of these different bodies. In my head, I was sort of like, I wonder if you all, like the folks leading them, like which of these would you say are like red, yellow, green? Like which are the ones that are like optimized for like what we hope from them? Which ones are like not, need some tweaking, and sort of like using what we have? This just seems like such a great grounding to think about all the places that we're engaging people internally and externally. So thank you to everyone who helped create this. I hope that this is like an actual working document that you all are using, and it's not something just created for this committee, but it was really helpful for me to see that.
I agree, it was super helpful, and I know it was a lot of work, so thank you to everyone for putting it together, and hopefully we will put it to very good use, all of us, and it can be a living document that evolves as our district does.
Well, we appreciate the feedback, but I will say, and I'm sure I speak for the staff, it was helpful for us. So it's almost as if we stood back and like, oh, I didn't know that was happening, and I didn't know you were engaged in it. So it was helpful for us. And would really like to, a next layer would be to see what's happening at the schools, because I think it would look pretty similar.
Yes, thank you again. I know a tremendous amount of work went into that, and thank you for everyone preparing for this meeting to present and inform us of all the community engagement work that's going on. We really appreciate it. All right, is that it, everybody? We say,
well, Ms. Doyle, Ms. Doyle, I just want to thank you for all of the work and thoughtfulness you've put into organizing this meeting. You have done a tremendous job. You're so thoughtful about setting the agenda and including everyone, and I'm appreciative for all of the labor you put into this. And I am grateful for the space we've created and grateful to Sarah for the idea. I'm looking forward to the work we're going to do in this committee, and feel like this meeting speaks to the importance of it, because I think we've had some really meaningful conversations this morning. So thank you to everyone.
thanks, Ms. McKenzie. Thanks, everyone. Ms. Smiley?
Oh no, I was just waving. I was not.
Okay, I think we're all done. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for your time, and have a great weekend. And we'll see you all on Monday, if not before.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Have a good weekend.
Thank you.